Joining us now, he's a former special agent and faculty associate of Arizona State University School of Criminology and Criminal Justice. You heard Anita Vogel mention in her report that there are so many questions. I want to know what questions you have at this point, and also, if you would, walk us through what the various law enforcement agencies have been investigating in these, 8 hours since the shooting?
There's so much information that there's going to be a matrix of peeling the layers back. Everything, the individual, the suspect himself, and the rings of association from family throughout his entire life. The firearm itself, anything that was recovered is going to yield much. But everything in this threat management environment, such as this, it yields the assumption that it's going to happen at every event. And so every possibility has to be exhausted. And so the Secret Service has a tremendous history of ever developing and responding to past learning lessons. After the attempted assassination of President Reagan, for example, there was a great investment in threat intelligence where they spent considerable effort in developing a way to analyze threats proactively, but also in addition to response, to base every event on the assumption that there is going to be an attempt.
And sadly today there was, and the shooter is dead. So who is the next most critical person or people authorities might want to speak to find out who this man was and why would he want to try to assassinate former President Trump?
Well, besides care for the victims and the former president, obviously to understand that it stopped with the shooter who was dead. So immediately, law enforcement's entire response is to make sure that this is not a multiple-headed dragon. It seems in some of the presentations here that they're probably confident that there's not anything glowing in terms of conspiracy or other actors, but that's going to be the immediate concern, that there isn't something broader at hand here. And until that is completely exhausted and they have satisfaction, that's when they'll speak to it and speak to, say, for example, the acts of a single person. In this case, this young man who did this horrific act, an act that threatens a democratic republic such as ours. But until they exhaust that, that is going to be the priority. And they will learn everything about this individual, his associations, and any potential motivations and intent. Ultimately, the person who committed this act is the one that knows why. We may never get the satisfaction as to motive and intent because it might reside and have ended with him. Yeah.
And of course, law enforcement, they've known the identity of the shooter for a while. We have now been reporting since the beginning of this hour. He's 20-year-old Matthew Crooks from Bethel Park, Pennsylvania. Even if he was working alone, how can law enforcement step up security and increase intelligence to sniff out would-be copycats?
Well, again, they're going to do a deep dig, and they're going to make an analysis right now. I can tell you with certainty that law enforcement has a tremendous amount of information on the suspect. And in addition to that, there has been a very quick analysis of any shortcomings in the security plan, the threat management, the response, the evacuation, and they will build on that larger. There will be a lot of emphasis on this. These things are generally analyzed by committee, as happened in previous events. They know a lot of information right now. More will come in the next couple of days. It'll make a very clear picture, but at the same time, the threat is assumed at every event. And so that's why every possibility and advantage that an individual could have has to be thwarted with that expectation, with good coverage, exploiting every technology, every human resource, in addition to the proactive threat management.
Of course, and here we just the Republican National Convention. I mean, this is a 4-day event that's going to start Monday. You've got 50,000 attendees expected there. Thousands of protesters, I understand, are expected to march nearby Pfizer Forum on day one. So how does the assassination attempt change security protocol at the RNC in Milwaukee?
Well, I can tell you, I was on the committee for the RNC in 2008 in St. Paul, Minnesota, and there was a tremendous amount of proactive investigations that led at least 6 months to a year ahead of time. And there were 3 real disruptive attempts, including the use of explosive devices, actually fire devices, Molotov cocktails, by anarchists that were coming to Minnesota for the purposes of disrupting the RNC or attacking candidates or their motorcades. And so this is the highest security level event. It's a national special security event. It gets a lot of resources. And I'm confident that the level of security here would defeat any attempts such as this, because it has a completely different profile. However, any event where you have a candidate for the presidency of the United States, a former U.S. president, has to elevate to that level, such as today.
Does it strike you? Absolutely. Does it strike you that this shooter is 20 years old?
It's concerning that anybody does this. It's concerning that any American would do this, because obviously we have adversaries around the world. There's very specific international adversaries to former President Trump. But for it to be domestic, of course, is of special concern. The fact that it's somebody young, I think that young people and older people can be radicalized in a false ideology, by false exposure to social media, by the erosion of the patriarchy. They get an ideal in their head. And, if you look at most evil acts that are done with some type of false justification, people feel righteous in their horrific actions. And my guess is this person felt like he was righteous in what he was doing, which is the biggest tragedy of all, because you have victims there that were Americans expressing their pride in our country, supporting their candidate, and at least one lost their lives, and there's a ring of suffering from the families. And then also the people that witnessed this. Ironically, I witnessed the attempted assassination of President Ford in 1975 in San Francisco. I was 10 years old, but the rings of this will go on and affect a lot of people besides the former president. It affects our nation. It is of the utmost concern.
Absolutely. Bernard Zapor, thank you very much for joining us.
It's been a long time since our country has been shaken by a political assassination attempt. But sadly, we're back there again. Coming up, we'll have the latest on the investigation and the history of previous shootings next, as our coverage continues of the shooting of former President Trump, live from Fox.